I used to speak to college students, after I'd been out in the field for a bit. And I told them, very early on that not that we didn't need more activists, not that we didn't need more good politicians or anything like that. We needed economists. We needed to understand that as long as the capitalistic framework was driving our economic decision making, that if we didn't get further upstream to where economics met policy and understanding that every decision that is being made has an 800-pound economic gorilla in the room that will chip away at every good policy, that will chip away at the best intentions, that will erode in the most degenerative way possible, that what we need in order to find a better equilibrium with our relationship with the planet, we're just going to keep losing.
Welcome to The Regeneration Will Be Funded. My name is Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're exploring the intersections of regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. Created with Ma Earth, you can find all of our conversations and more at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's conversation with Dave Fortson, founder and CEO of Loa Labs. Dave has his hands in many different crypto and refi projects. And in this conversation, we talk about really finding meaning and purpose within the context of Web3 and how these tools can be used for positive impact. We go into things like, how do we craft better narratives for the Web3 space, politics and partisanship, and the resistance that sometimes exists on the left around all things crypto. We talk about community and values and our shared ideas and visions for how Web3 can assist in ecological coordination. I went on a bit of a rant about the potential of Web3 in this episode. I guess I was feeling more feisty than usual that morning. The conversation was recorded at the Refi Summit in May 2023 in Seattle. I hope you get something from it. On to the show with Dave Fortson. We are here today with Dave Fortson. Dave is the founder and CEO of Loa Labs. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
We're here at Refi Summit. You've been on stage emceeing for most of the time here. How's your conference going so far?
It's feeling pretty good. This is my second MC experience with Refi Summit. Just reflecting back a year ago, it was May, or in April, May last year when things were just blowing up on the Terra Luna front, for those who are following in the crypto space. But either way, it was one of the kind of triggering meltdowns that seemed to trigger some other meltdowns. Anyhow, reflecting back and looking and now being here, I'm feeling, pretty good. There's a little, I think it's a little quieter, even if we have some more people. I think just the more dedicated building and mission driven, I'm in this no matter what the hell happens, group is here, which tends to be what happens during kind of economic calamity that, kind of removes the froth and leaves the signal. So that feels pretty good. It feels more mature, frankly, a little bit more mature, a little more collaborative, a little bit more, I think, empathetic for each other, because it's been a journey to make it through the year, frankly.
Yeah. I felt like a real sense of humility at the happy hour last night, and just really appreciated Gregory Landaway's comments about working together in coordination across these different projects in the ecosystem. Yeah. And so Loa Labs, just at a high level, what is that?
Well, probably the first place to start, because it's been part of my professional entrepreneur history, is Loa stands for Law of Attraction. I'm not a terribly woo-woo guy per se, but the idea was what you give off to the world is what you get back. Really being out in front and intentional and vocal about the vision that you have for the world. And you tend to attract the humans, the energy, the capital that aligns accordingly. So the labs part is, that spirit of experimentation and innovation that I think is pretty ripe in a nascent industry like Web3. So Loa Labs, integrated product and marketing studio. We lean more toward the marketing at this point, and we spun up about a year and a half ago. And so after years in marketing comms, movement building, I'll call it, brought that spirit into Web3, working with at the intersection of impact and Web3. So tokenizing impact, working with founders, projects, protocols, many of by nature are in early stages, and helping guide their community building, helping guide their go-to-market strategy, user experience, coalition building, partnerships, all of that side. Just given I've been in the game for quite some time, and and there's a lot of relatively young founders that I think appreciate a steady, sober hand during in a very volatile, unpredictable industry, and where everyone's, at least in our space, is trying to do good, try to build a better world with blockchain.
Yeah, and I'd love to dive into some of the initiatives and projects that Loa Labs is a part of. But before we go there, you mentioned kind of spending time in the movement building and comm space. Can you share a bit more about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I came out of the Bay Area. Wonderful time there in San Jose, California. And I still remember, I think I was 16 and I took a spirituality of nature class. I was at a Jesuit all-boys high school, and which was relatively liberal. Go Jesuits! And that class triggered something in me. It triggered a part which really has shaped my career of valuing and realizing that we are part of nature. I think we tend to talk about it over there, but we're deeply part of it. It's spiritually part of us, biologically part of us, the cellular level part of us. And anyhow, that sent me on a journey that took me into UCSB, and probably into my first 10 years of my career of being what I would call like an ecological activist. So it started out as beach cleanups, moved into sitting in the chancellor's office to try to stop oil drilling, proceeded into political activism, organizing political campaigns and the levers of power, running for office myself and getting elected very young, and then moving into lobbying and advocacy. So it's a very, and a lot of that involved, frankly, me going door to door and retail politicking, convincing, not letting people get by me when I'm sitting there in front of the university center trying to get them to sign an initiative or vote this way or vote that way. So it gave me a really early, keen sense of just humans and how we communicate, interact, and how to help change behaviors. So that was a quick part of the career. And then as I moved beyond, kind of frankly stale on politics, it felt pretty degenerative just by nature for me. Didn't bring out the best in humans, at least the politics that I was surrounded by. So started getting more into going to learn technology, go learn business. So I went to work for a technology startup. But while I was there, simultaneously moved out into a 300-acre permaculture ranch with my family.
Cool.
Lived in a 300 square foot metal shack with a compost toilet and an outdoor shower. Did that for a number of years, brought people from all over the world to talk about regenerative agriculture, some of the kind of luminaries that are in that space. And then while I was there, I started my first Loa. There's Loa Tree, there's Loa Comm, and there's Loa Labs.
Oh, cool.
So Loa Comm is probably the more relevant one recently, which was essentially a movement building firm for Better World Companies at the time. So we worked with mission-driven companies like All Good and 1% for the Planet, doing anything from business development to marketing comms campaigns and otherwise. And that's how running into my first Web3 experience was Christian Scheer and Gregory Landaway. Who I worked with in the regenerative ag and food space, we're trying to tokenize, we're trying to bring essentially nature onto the blockchain as a means of valuing it. And I was like, I have no clue what you're talking about, but I love ag. I love you all. You're looking for some marketing comms, I'm happy to help. Fast forward a few years, I was green pilled, as they say, and spun up a company just dedicated to Web3 and impact, and still deeply connected to the Regen Network ecosystem.
Great. We had a great conversation with Gregory Landaway. which people can check out, and obviously the green pill reference to something being popularized now by Kevin Owocki, just to keep shilling our other interviews.
That's right.
People can check that one out as well. Okay, so you spent time in kind of the movement building space, you discover Web3. Now, fast forward some years later, like, how are you thinking about the space?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably instructive, and I assume this is not the first time you've heard this, being in policy, being in advocacy, being in business, traditional business, the part that it felt like I felt like we had the tables turned on us all the time, or everything was stacked against us, no matter what. It was finger in the dike at best.
And you're referring to the Web3 space?
I'm referring to Web2 space, the Web2 movement building. Like,
I see.
How do we protect the planet?
Yeah.
And the part that struck me, and I still remember this day, I used to speak to college students, after I'd been out in the field for a bit. And I told them, very early on that not that we didn't need more activists, not that we didn't need more good politicians or anything like that. We needed economists. We needed to understand that as long as the capitalistic framework was driving our economic decision making, that if we didn't get further upstream to where economics met policy, and understanding that every decision that is being made has an 800-pound economic gorilla in the room that will chip away at every good policy, that will chip away at the best intentions, that will erode in the most degenerative way possible, that what we need in order to find a better equilibrium with our relationship with the planet. We're just going to keep losing. We're getting used to too many Pyrrhic victories of a big sweeping piece of legislation. And still to this day, think of all of the sweeping pieces of legislation that are historic, and we find ourselves in really a crisis mode, right? The Endangered Species Act, amazing, visionary, and the Clean Water Act, and all of those things have been slowed or stemmed some of the maybe more rapid degradation of ecological systems. But because of the invisible, both invisible, visible, and this both subtle and strong hand of economics that is designed to extract, that we're just going to keep losing. So what appealed to me in moving into Web3 is a thought that we could program values into value, into money, that we could think about, and I have my own, even as an activist, I'm not a big fan of revolution with a capital R. I'm more of a fan of like revolution, where R is as small and in parentheses, and it's evolution, where it's consistent progress and with around big ideas, but that we're not naturally just going to we're not going to do one step forward, 3 steps back. And in order to do that, from my perspective, that we need to get out in front of economics and the environment. So I know for a lot of people that's reductive, that there's a lot of dangers, understandably, around that, around just the sometimes separating the value of the spiritual, intrinsic, natural cellular relationship we have with nature and putting it into this economic bucket. But to me, it's like pulling the immediate, like, we have to do this now cord and figure that out. So when I was, early on with Regen Network, the idea that we could infect, inoculate the economic system with ecological value and human relationships, that we could calibrate and become more, we could just have better chance of relating to each other, that embodied what mattered to you and I, or to what matters to our watershed, or what matters to 2 watersheds that are adjacent to each other, and that we could create more agile, more bioregional economies. To me, that was like mind-blowing, because it felt like the missing piece, at least in the current paradigm, that we needed to like press on super hard right now, knowing that we're going to make a bunch of mistakes, knowing that unwinding or even infecting the current economic system is like, it's a major hill to climb, but required. So that's what got me super excited. I'm not an economics guru. I'm more on the marketing comms. I'm on the human side. I'm on the, talk to your neighbor and community organizing side. But it didn't take very long for me to see that this is where I needed to locate myself at this part of my career and make a go at things and figure out how to tokenize impact, how to tokenize values, how to redesign the way that we relate to the biosphere by using technological tools and create more elegant ways and less coercive ways of changing the way we behave in order to be in service to reversing climate change.
Yeah. You're speaking my language. Yeah. I mean, this is really the impulse and the motivation for this entire interview series and project. And I feel like I've come to many of those same theses and conclusions in my own work in the climate space. I just really like your articulation. Like, to me, the notion of, we tend to lump a lot of our problems onto the word capitalism. And, when you ask people like, okay, well, what do you mean by capitalism? It's amazing how many different answers you really get. Like, but I do think that, like, at the root of capitalism is capital. And, like, if we have a chance to program different incentive structures and values and governance into the nature of capital itself. When I first found crypto, I worried that, like, is this just going to, like, hyper financialize the world? Like, we're just going to, like, atomize everything into some sets of numbers and representations of money. And, like, I don't know if that's really the world I want to live in, But what I've come to appreciate is that we actually, the current lens of money is so homogenous right now. And what crypto actually can do is give us a plurality of ways to recognize that there's many different forms of value in capital. And those representations don't always have to be fungible mathematical representations either. Like, what NFTs and other forms of, token representations give us is the ability to infuse art or symbolism or different forms of coordinated relationships or governance. And so, it's really just like a new canvas, and all bets are off, and none of us know how this is going to go, and we're all super early and everything else. But I do think that the other thing you said about, like, the hesitance that some people have, in my language, would be like, to commodify nature, right? To financialize that which should not be financialized. And that's been a theme we've explored a lot in this interview series. And I think part of what I would say to that is the economic system is already entangled in nature.
For sure.
It just only seems to value extraction and degradation. Like, why is a tree worth more cut down than standing?
That's right.
Right? That's the current economic paradigm and system that we have. And so, recognizing that, how do we not commodify nature? How do we change the economic system so that nature isn't being so commodified? How do we change the economic system to be in service to life?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the way humans in our lizard brains still are in a fight or flight mode, I think the nature of our extractive economic system has, pitted us against each other. It's pitted us against nature, whether we know it or not. And I think we find still to this day, like, a deep spiritual dissatisfaction about where we are.
Yeah.
That people have a hard time naming, right? Yeah. They can't quite grasp or hold, because we've got the pings and dings, and we've got distraction here, distraction there. But there's like a pang of hunger for something more substantive, and where we can marvel at our ability to get to the moon, or we could, to build a new skyscraper. The fact that we have still deeply struggled at some of the more spiritually and, like, intrinsically rewarding ways of engaging our life together. Like, you and I are going to be expired, in X number of years. We're all together. Where some of us are looking at are the future for our children. Some of, my parents are, reflecting on their past. And you can, without a doubt, in almost all of those, find this, like, feel like we're just missed something. Like yes, we worked hard. Yes, our legacy was, but did we fulfill? Like there's a slight lack of fulfillment that I don't think we've told a great story around. Back to like landing this around what the opportunity is with blockchain and crypto, and what the opportunity is to re-relate to each other and to this world that we live in, is to kind of better communicate our internal needs and be able to have those be valued, to be able to design economic systems, design human relationship systems that imbue those values into those and help architect in a more elegant way. So again, I'm not as smart as a lot of people in thinking this through, but when I think of Web3 opportunities, you talk about governance, you talk about programming values into a token, or you talk about more precise architectures and the way that we can relate to each other. And to me, it's just like there's an agility to that, that there is a way not to avoid our continued habit to externalizing all of these costs, to externalizing nature, to externalizing that hunger that each of us have to like really live this fulfilling life, that when we're on our deathbed, we all know none of us were like thinking about that email that we sent, or we're not thinking about this deal that we closed or anything along those lines. It's like this deep other thing that I think, to me, like Web3 is promising at least a better opportunity to start to design and value around that. So it's, and again, as noting, that was the spirituality of nature that got me into this gig. And now I'm tying this, essentially to this Web 2 spiritual religious framework into a Web 3 economic framework and design, which I'd never done before this conversation, is pretty wild. And it absolutely makes 100% sense. Whereas like, I think we get it, like I was talking about at the summit, we're pretty in love with this Web3 technology, the lexicon of it, and all the acronyms and all these things. But it really is like this incredibly beautiful and I keep going back to the word agile opportunity for us to like redesign with each other,
right? Just
to fundamentally be like, look, there's nothing that says that if these are my values and this is where I want to be in my life, that I can't design a relationship with my community, the micro and the macro level, with my country and with the world, if I just had better tools, and that I had more elegant ways of sharing and value with each other, that is fundamentally not designed to like extract, but is actually fundamentally designed to fill the cup of the human experience. So, idealistic, yes, but I haven't seen a lot of other examples of technology stacks or architectural designs that are, or an architecture that will allow this level of expression that I think Web3 might give us just a bit better opportunity to get there.
Right. Well said. And from a marketing and comms perspective, like I would argue we're not doing a very good job creating that narrative space of spirituality of nature, filling the cup of the human experience, like creating a sense of fulfillment, like. And yes, it's still early days, and so we love our jargon, and it's a bunch of, geeks, counting myself in that, like just kind of, still trying to figure out what are these Legos and how do they fit together and everything else. But I guess I'm curious, given your lens, like what do you see as ways that we can frame for the next 100 million people and beyond who come into this space? What's the aesthetic? What's the brand? What's the stories? What are the memes? Like, how do we move beyond DeFi, NFTs, acronym soup, whatever, into creating that type of appeal?
It's a great question, and it's an active conversation I'm having. I think where so far what I'm finding resonating at the end of the day, that's even driving to me some of the more innovative uses of blockchain technology, is, one, we've got to reconvene as humans, like literally sitting across the table and breaking bread. So, and this is maybe more a function of how we get there, like, and less about knowing exactly what the story is yet, because I think everyone's got slightly different versions of their story. But I'll just say what we found, recently is like we took a group down into just outside of Medellin in Colombia for like a 3-day retreat on a bunch of like otherwise competitors getting together in the same room, being like, look, all of our layer 1 blockchains, and for those aren't who in the blockchain space, these are like the big dogs, right? They're all trying to attract customers. They're all trying to get, capture usage and all of these things. And I'd say often in a, at least for the ones that aren't specifically designed for ecological healing, like regen, but they're, they have some degen tendencies, but they have aspects of refi. So pulling them together and being able to break bread in the jungle, in the clean, clear waters, and start to and remind ourselves of the connection that we have to the most basic natural functions on the planet, while we're talking about zeros and ones, and talking about what are the ideals that, where so often we get pitted and put into our corners to compete against each other, which in and of itself can lead to like extractive tendencies. But to actually know that Web3, again, it offers us this ability to be nested together with a shared mission and a shared direction, and we still can express our individual selves. But you aren't forcing me to do things in a way that are against my values, which is, I know it sounds, it's kind of this interesting concept that I think, again, Web3 offers, is that it still allows like a level of like freedom of expression, of truly living in your own like body, living in your own value set, but still being able to interrelate and interlock with other folks in a way that still respects their sovereignty, but also has the ability to tie us together with shared like incentives or shared goals and objectives, and removes a lot of the the chafing and confrontation or coerciveness that I think our legacy government systems, or even our legacy business models, have essentially exacerbated the divisions. Throw social media into the mix and other things, but the Web3 technology stack and I think the token opportunities, tokens are just starting to, I think, help people reimagine how to be together on Earth, and and it's not like have your cake and eat it too, but really feel like that they can not retreat into fight or flight. I need mine to protect me and mine. But that we can actually design for thrive, for natural surplus, sharing of resources that still respects my ability to like manifest and show all of me in this lifetime, together, so individual as we moving forward and being able to reflect back, that I left it all out on the table. I lived my fullest life here, and I wasn't like, yeah, but I had to spend 9 hours a day at some extractive job that sucked my soul, and I had to be on the road all day, which is, just grates at people's souls for a lot of times. Yeah. So anyhow, to me, it starts to just give us the opportunity to fill the cup, to think about filling the cup, which has both an individual, like, what is my legacy? What is my mission? And that we're very much a codependent species. Like we need other human beings, like all this, like, kind of faux freedom stuff where people are like, imagine themselves being just to live alone in a mountain. That's fine, but that's not how we got here. Right. And it's not how we're going to get out of this. Not how we're going to get out of it either. Right. So anyhow, it's a little obtuse explanation, but it's just like, there's like a very deep individual, but there's a deep individual I, and there's a deep individual we. I think that, this opportunity in blockchain allows us to explore.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, for me, it provokes thoughts about like what John Hillis, another person that we had a conversation with, is doing with network cities, with Cabin, or what also we've been exploring like the bioregional lens a lot in speaking to people both from the climate space as well as from the crypto space, and so much of the ecological crises boil down to a thesis in my mind around reimagining how we interact with our local landscapes.
Totally.
All action has to start fundamentally local, and these tools of new forms of governance and organizing and coordinating do give us a way to reimagine how we organize at bioregional levels, like at the watershed level, for example. And these spaces, whether it's kind of digital nomads going into nature in cabin DAO, or whether it's bioregional, reworking our coordination systems, like they're new surface area for different evolutions of culture.
That's right.
And how do we provoke those values, like you talked about, of being more collaborative, recognizing our independence, bringing our whole selves, being able to be out connected to the land. And yeah, it's just it's like there's so many things in this stack that we're going to be exploring simultaneously.
Well, and I want to actually maybe pull on a string that because there's also this fascinating area around governance, which has been near and dear to my heart as working for government, within government, outside of government, and also right now just having this like chuckle around this like gap of our storytelling, where right now, and I don't know when this will show, but a lot of our, on my side of the voting spectrum generally, liberal Democrats are right now putting the screws down on crypto, right? And I'm sitting here as like somebody who's literally been in the social change space for close to 30 years. And I could not imagine a more exciting opportunity to fundamentally bring the values that ostensibly a lot of our liberal democratic friends have and give them this tool set for the expression of public health, for the expression of even distribution or more just distribution of wealth, of bringing new voices to the table and giving them permanent governance power. The idea of making sure that our natural resources are valued, protected, and governed by the communities and even the non-human communities that this is their home. Like there's like this disconnect already that I feel like we missed a huge opportunity early in our storytelling about the potential of blockchain to, whether you're on the right side or the left side of the aisle, that's I guess my whole point here is there's really something beautiful for everyone to like maintain freedom, to share in a collective movement together where we can like, okay, this particular value, maybe we have a little distance on, but there's like probably 90% of the things, like if you got us drinking, a glass of wine, having or beer and sitting down having dinner, we're going to agree on a lot of those things, but we haven't had the systems, the economic opportunities or the structures to fully express that and nest and interlock or become more elegantly interdependent together. So we've like gone into camps, right? And we're fighting, this, and the pendulum swinging back and forth, just crashing into civic society, where this, I think, blockchain opportunities, the governance related to it, the value, the being able to imbue values at the very micro level to bioregional, the macro level to even just like, I like trucks, you like, mountain bikes. I bet we could design a relationship between us. In a DAO format or in a blank format or whatever. And instead, we're still like subjecting ourselves in the corners to have this fight that is, to me, unnecessary. Like with a little bit of imagination and better tools. I think the better tools are getting much closer. And now we have to, again, think about the story to convince our friends on the right and our friends on the left that, look, this isn't how it needs to be.
Right.
Like yes, maybe, again, things move fast, technology moves fast, the conspiracy, this toxic like media world, but we can actually design a better way to reconnect and re-engage as like just a species that is absolutely codependent on, each other in a community. Like we may be separated by a fence, but we're breathing the same air, drinking the same water, we're attached to the same ecological functions, and we've got to figure out a more elegant way to like organize ourselves together.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like when I speak with people on the left who are resistant to crypto, that the resistance is actually fairly modest.
Yeah.
It's like mostly a function of being informed by sensationalized media headlines.
Yep.
And a general dissonance with the cultural vibe that is coming out of the space, which I completely can agree with and understand. And that it's like once there's an actual moment to have a conversation about the possibilities, or to go a little bit underneath the surface and to get past like, oh, the mining's killing the planet, so therefore all bad, whatever. Yeah. Oh, crypto bro, casino, stealing money from grandma, all bad. Like once you can kind of like, okay, now let's talk about bioregional currencies.
That's right.
Let's talk about different forms of governance. And let's talk about new tooling that can enable economic coordination and incentives with harmony for the planet. Like once you get to a bit more of depth, I find that the resistance dissipates.
100%.
And what we're actually up against is the resistance of nation states.
Yeah.
The resistance of entrenched banking incentives, the resistance of power structures that are obviously ripe for disruption.
That's right.
And the thing that we agree on collectively across the partisan camps is, what is congressional approval rating? Like less than 10%?
Yeah, 20-ish, whatever. It's something terrible.
So the thing that everyone agrees on is that the system as it stands is not working, that we are not satisfied with the status quo, right? Like that, I think, is actually the consensus that we can probably start to reinforce. And I haven't really thought through this that much, but in terms of like, I do think that is part of the message is like, do you believe, this is something that Zach Anderson from Coordinape said really eloquently, and I'm just sitting here pitching all the other interviews.
That's great.
But, do you really think that like the current institutional designs are up for the task?
That's right.
Right? Like, I think most people don't believe that. Like, most people do
really
not have faith, and they're not, right? Not. And it's not, like, I believe that the people inside of government and inside the large multinational corporations and so forth, like, I believe, by and large, the intents are positive.
Sure.
And I believe in the human spirit being fundamentally directed towards one that favors towards moralistic altruism and good. But I do think that the system design that currently dictates and incentivizes and coordinates those behaviors is deeply problematic and flawed.
Totally.
And like we have to change that. And so like why wouldn't we take new tooling and new system designs that are being afforded us in this like moment in time, like this is what's around the table right now, and give that a shot. And like let lots of experiments bloom.
That's right.
Let's see what we can create in this evolutionary process. To shut the door and just to resist it because you saw a headline in the New York Times, it's like, it's insane.
Well, and I think actually a really good example that pulled this back into what excited me about Web3, what touches on governance, it touches on our political divides, our value divides, is the farmer, right? So farmers, the lore of the farmer, right, of just the American farmer who's been, developed or grown the breadbasket that has fed a nation, if not the world, right? And when I cut my teeth in environmentalism, farmers were often the enemy, right? Because they were subject to forces that required them to use chemical fertilizers, or required them to use heavy machinery, or work to get unrealistic yields developed and sent to market as fast as possible as bigger businesses poured money in, and agribusiness and corporations started to like infect the family farm. Yeah. So it changed the face of agriculture. Yet the farmers you spoke with were like, nobody cares more about the land than we do. Right. We like our entire livelihood, both spiritually and economically, depends on our need to care for this land. Yeah. But we're forced to make choices that put us, on razor thin margins, on an edge all the time. And so, when I get back to like, wow, is something else possible? Because I was like pushing down regulations on these farmers that were one size fits all, that had made no sense. And the farmer's like, have you ever been on a piece of land and tried to implement farming with the regulation that you just put to save that particular species or protect your riparian area?
Right.
It's like, you're crazy.
Right.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And again, it was just like this inelegant tool sets in the camps that we were put in, the lack of understanding versus being able to come to a farmer or a land steward, make sure that they're awarded properly, regularly for their stewardship of land on like some shared values of the community, that it recognizes the unique bioregion or riparian area that they're occupying, recognizes the unique biological characteristics that they're dealing with, recognizing the food needs of an area, recognizing all of these things and having so few interesting tools to be able to do that.
Totally.
Let alone the governance structures or the oversight that wasn't just being like, we're going to send paper pusher A with his regulatory hat on to come onto your land to do this, while independent farmer B, who's been caring for this land for 150 years, is feeling like they're living in some other place that they didn't remember growing up in, creating this social divide and all of these things. So back to this, like the potential. Again, I don't think we've landed this in Web3. I don't think blockchain has been the salve yet for all of these problems. But clearly, we are starting to like unveil a set of this new way of relating to each other that allows us to value allows us to value the ecology, but also like the cultural values of a community and create more interesting ways of stimulating the best of each other, the best with the way that we can relate to land, not dominion over it, and not just be subject to the whims of somebody a million miles away who's got a different idea of how we should steward our lands, that we can create a bunch of interlocking, interrelating systems that allow us to like, here's where the values that we're looking to achieve, how do we design, at the street level, at the county level, at the watershed level, the bioregional level, state level, otherwise, with just a beautiful set of like things that just didn't exist that I think have then calcified, and we just like, that's the only way to do it. Well, that's not the only way, and that scares the shit out of people.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, less people think that we are just waxing poetic on the breathless promise of Web3 without any realism. Like, I live on a farm. This has been a big part of my inquiry as well. And it's like, so okay, let's talk brass tacks. Like, just in the example of farms, for example, in a rural area like where I live in New Zealand, well, collectively we have an incentive to see farms shift to more regenerative practices, to bring more carbon down into the soil, to have cleaner waterways, and to harmonize and protect land for better biodiversity outcomes, right? Like, instead of subsidizing fossil fuel, chemical companies, which most governments around the world do, right? Those funds could actually be allocated towards these commons-based natural resources that we want to see, like soil and carbon, like fresh water, like biodiversity. And the new verification methods, whether it's satellites in the sky or sensors in the soil or any number of things that are emerging around MRV, measuring, reporting, verification, can unlock funds with smart contract-like transparency and guarantees, so that farmers can actually get paid for stewarding and protecting land, rather than only making their income on the basis of things that incentivize taking shortcuts. Just as a starting example. Now, okay, let's talk about the supply chain. Well, the supply chain right now has no transparency, is riddled with intermediaries, all sorts of different shenanigans happening, and people clipping the ticket, where the farmer is getting a fraction of the money of what the food actually sells for in the grocery store. Okay, well, guess what? I mean, having a common shared ledger system that's transparent, that speaks the same language, radically shapes what supply chains can do, right? And then you start talking about local food movements. Well, right now, one of the big challenges to our health and our ecological health and to farmer income and everything else is that we've constructed this system where, out in the rural farm in New Zealand in the middle of winter, I expect that I can be eating mangoes from the other side of the planet any time of the year, right? And the fully loaded consequences of this type of approach to our food system are severe, and we're starting to pay the price. Well, how do you actually create incentives for people to buy and eat and share locally?
That's right.
Right? Well, if you had more sovereignty of your local economic system and local monetary policy, so much more is opened up,
right.
rather than leaking that financial value out into some centralized nation state party, right? And local currencies and experiments have been happening for a long time, and they've mostly hit ceilings and limits because there's been no fungibility between them. Guess what? Crypto offers things like automated market makers, where you can actually trade in and out of a plurality of different currencies permissionlessly, decentrally, openly, transparently. And guess what? Like, we have over $1 trillion of proof points that have been, just traded on Uniswap alone to show that this is possible. This is not just like chalkboard ideas here. And we're only 5 to 10 years into this revolution. So we're just like early days. And that's just like one set of examples in one industry, in one context, of how these things can reshape and change. And we didn't even talk about governance and sharing power and voting. And I'm off my high horse, but
well, and I think that level, I think that the threat that you touched on it a bit, where we get, I think, regulators, I think we're getting central governments, central banks, they're smart people. Like, I think they get that blockchain and Web3 is potentially the most disruptive coordination tool that has probably been seen in many, many, many years, right? In that, and people are generally fear change, even the brightest amongst us, right? Because that's just, it's human nature, right? Change is just, can be fearful. I think our, back to storytelling and back to like where we go now is we've got to be able to pitch a vision of what is possible, back to filling our personal cups, back to our personal and individual freedoms, being able to be part of a diverse and mutually respected community that can value you, really deeply value you, and that we can design a way to connect with each other that honors your individuality, it honors my individuality, it honors our shared experience in a region, it honors our shared experience as human beings at this time. And that is rightfully going to scare a bunch of people who have gotten used to extracting value, making money the old way. Because let's just call it the old way at this point. Really, it's broken. It is fundamentally broken. It is failing at this point, failing to the point of threatening existentially human life, or disrupting it deeply over the next 200 years. And here we are, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed with these brand new tools and these philosophies and pretty radical concepts that really aren't that radical at the end of the day.
No, it's like, let's eat local and let's share in the value we create, and let's be more democratic.
And we're not saying, you've got to go back to caveman. You don't have to go back to wearing, things that the abundance on this planet is so incredibly powerful in that reconnecting with nature, so that we are no longer a parasite, but actually live in mutualistically beneficial way with each other as humans and with our natural ecosystems, and like respecting the way that we think about design of our construction and all of these things, to just radically take advantage of the natural gifts that are in place. It's just like, it's hard to tell the story and get people to like really think about it without it, looking like the Hobbit house or something along those lines. That's where I think, the mimetic value of like solar punk and the mimetic value of like being able to like have the technosphere, biosphere, holding hands in a way that doesn't mean you're a granola, and it doesn't mean you can't, have a really interesting way of transporting yourself, from one place to another, or some of the pet things that we love or we've grown to love. Like, I think we can do that, but we've got to visually tell the story. We've got to write the story. We've got to like allow people to imagine themselves in that place and tell their own story of like, I want to take control again of my life that I've got 100 years or less here. And I want it to be the most beautiful thing that it's all I've got. Like, and we can say, here's what's possible.
Yeah.
Here's how we can do it together.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to take over what you're doing. You're not going to take over what I'm doing. We can be together. We can be dependent on each other and independent of each other in a way that you've never seen before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think we've found that aesthetic mimetic vibe yet.
No.
You know, I feel like, you know, even if, and with all like respect to everyone in refi, but like I think that the refi space still feels a little bit like, yeah, it just feels to me like it doesn't really have that gut level like grab you appeal, you know, and it's a little bit predictable with like, you know, the green organic like kind of granola,
That's right,
you know, kind of energy, not in all spaces, but you know, just overgeneralizing here. And I think that it makes sense because we're not really ready for onboarding lots of people.
I agree.
You know,
Yeah.
and so we're kind of trying to talk to multiple audiences at the same time, which is like you and I right now are offering a little bit of like here's the promise, but at the same time, it's like, well, we're still building the nuts and bolts of the engine itself, right? Like we can see around some of the corners,
That's right.
but it doesn't mean it's ready to fly. And yeah, I think if anyone's listening to this that's really tracking this challenge and this opportunity of like, how do we create a distinct cultural and mimetic space
That's right.
and really kind of open the canvas for this, I would love to chat with you because
me too.
yeah, reach out to us because I think that this is a big part of the work.
100%.
Yeah,
No,
a
the
big part of the
stories
work.
of stories fundamentally shape the world. We need to create the story, and probably we need to create the stories,
Totally.
right? And stories that have like, it's like we need the SDK of storytelling for the you know, this regenerative future, right? Because it's going to be modular. Everyone's going to have their own way of storytelling that will become lore.
Exactly.
But we've not quite nailed that, and that's okay. I think, right? We're just not going to figure this out overnight. And I think we should have empathy
Totally.
and compassion for each other that
Totally.
we will not be the ones that finish this.
Yeah.
We're starting to light the proverbial fires, if you will,
Totally.
all over the world that will be picked up and caretaken or curated by others that are next to us. So, but I think if we set the patterns now, you know, and let's do the hard work and make some mistakes. Like let's break some things. That's okay. Like that's how we're going to short circuit as much as possible by being bold, by being naive but directive. You know, by just trusting each other that we're going to give it our all and screw up a bunch. But if we can document and share and teach each other and, you know, build in public and be transparent, just like the things that we're saying in our learning curve together, then we're going to advance much faster than not. Like setting aside the ego, you know, that, you know, hey, I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs of regenerative finance. Like, no, you're not. You know, that's like that's not even what this is, right? I mean,
by definition,
you won't be. So anyhow, I've got a lot of appreciation again tying this up. That, you know, a year later after the first Regenerative Finance Summit, here we are again, you know, in May of 2023 or so. That we're doing okay. Like I feel like we've got a brave crew that's, you know, endeavoring. You know, together and, you know, all over the world, like it's so beautiful with the borderless nature of the work that we're doing right now. It fills my heart, you know, like knowing that there's a bunch of stuff going on that I have no clue about. I have no control, and I am so grateful for that. Now it allows me to like release the responsibility to some degree.
You got that piece. I got this piece.
You got.
Here.
It's like you know, and because I want to finish living my life too, right? I got beautiful children. I've got a beautiful wife. I live in Santa Barbara, California. I'm like, I want to go enjoy it and know that somebody else is also working and playing and having a great time, and we're just going to do our damn best. So
Right.
you for doing your part in this, and for all of you, listening out there. It's I'm proud of us. Like I think we're doing our best, and I look forward to somebody making me uncomfortable thinking about what is next and getting excited and reflecting and then figuring out how to build with you and around what you're doing.
Are there any specific projects that you want to shout out that have your attention the most in terms of what Loa Labs is currently supporting or what you're currently looking for next?
Yeah, I think we've got, we just helped launch Solid World DAO's forward contracting platform. Very exciting for missing green money Lego and the Web3 climate finance stack, to make sure that we can actually start funding these land stewards before the carbon is being sequestered. Critical piece, very exciting. Regen Network, near and dear to our heart. I think intellectually, spiritually, and delivery product wise are just really holding a space that has been special and influential in ways that I think will be appreciated for a long, long time to come. I feel very honored to be part of that. Blockchain times climate, again, pulling together a bunch of players that just says, hey, we've got to cooperate. That's just it. That is the business. We are in the business of cooperation. We can compete because there's a value there too in a market-based system. But before we compete, we've got to cooperate. We don't have central governments to build our roads and our plumbing. We've got to actually just work together to figure that out and build it ourselves. And then it's paying some attention to our friends in the global South. The regenerative finance movement and climate change. Man, is it impacting the global South more than probably any of us in the global North really understand or realize. So know that Loa Labs and others are making investments in that movement down there, and just making sure that is something as simple as like having conversations in local time zones and having making sure that resourcing from the global North is going to the South in order to properly fund those efforts, because Lord knows we've extracted plenty of value and sent it to the North and to our coffers, and I think redistributing that in service to reversing climate change and stimulating green economic models is, I think, a really exciting area, and making sure that they have the power and governance, our friends in the South to direct that, and not that coming from us, which has been, I think, a part of the problem. So those are a few that I'm excited about. But I just say generally, I'm deeply appreciative of. I think, just as I mentioned, of the bravery of this space. Like the regulatory environment's terrible, the economic environment's terrible.
It really is. It's just like a difficult moment.
It's just a difficult moment, and being in front in stage and listening to everyone talk over the past couple of days, it's like this is a group of relentless, determined, and brave humans that a lot of people are looking at them cockeyed, right? You're in crypto. You must be, are you okay? Everything all good? And they're continuing on, endeavoring just to. And most of us are going to fail, like in classic terms, right? Our businesses are going to fold because that's just what happens. But it will be the next wave that will build on top of our mistakes and our successes, and exponentially grow the impact of this movement. So anyhow, my cup is feeling full, and I'm very grateful for that.
Dave, really appreciate the conversation. We work in this space. We're going to keep marching on as well. Looking forward to being on the journey together.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
All right.
All right. What'd you think? Please leave a comment in the space below. To check out more about Loa Labs and the projects they're supporting, go to loalabs.io. You might also be interested in the other conversations we had at the ReFi Summit, as well as joining our community Discord, where we'll be talking about things like crafting new narratives for the Web3 space. All of that and more is available at maearth.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.